Hello and welcome to another episode of the devlog of Runes of Aereal. So, what have I been up to lately? Well, this here enemy apply damage has got some extra parameters like this action, this parameter type, and this scroll UID or card or scroll UID. Why is that? Because let's see, for example, if we go and look at the cards. Cards, here we are. We click a card, and I've added an extra card type here. This card type can contain multiple things. Usually it's nothing, and then it's a regular card like something like a curse or a strike or a skill or whatever. But sometimes, and I'm looking for one right now, it can be something else, like, where are we here? This one here is electricity. So whenever we play a lightning card, this card is electricity. And why is that useful? Because sometimes when a card type is electricity, so when electricity is applied and the character is wet, then that electricity should kind of double or count for more than just the regular damage action. So for all those cards, like for example incineration will have fire damage, and for some cards there will be nothing at all, or just a strike or nothing at all, I believe. So we'll have to change all of that for every card. And I think, for example, this one needs fire, this one needs skill, oh, this one needs venom, yeah, deal damage, venom to all creatures. So these card types are important now, here, because they are sent in here as a parameter, and we apply damage. For example, Thorns is a special one. Cards.card type, here you see it. So for example, on cast card damage, we apply the damage off to that enemy for so much damage for that card type, and we're talking about this specific scroll. So what happens in here is first we determine the actual base damage, and this base damage is using a new function called enemy get damage. And enemy get damage is the one right here, and it's a very special function, and it's a very important function as well, because based on an enemy, on a certain base damage, a type, and a certain scroll or a card which is being used, we're going to be returning here at the end of the function a string of fire damage, which is a number, a semicolon, and then a hint. Because what I want to do is when I hover over a card, that hint should show, and it should count for the extra damage which is being dealt as a result of like a trait or a multiplier, or the fact that the enemy is being targeted, for example. So all of these things should be taken into account. So let's just start a sandbox to see what that looks like. So let's create like this one with Achilles. So Achilles has one attack bonus here, and let's add rage here to trait, and let's random 3, for example, and a starter deck. Let's adjust that deck a bit to, for example, lose this and add something like deal 4 damage to all enemies, and here, for example, 8 damage and stuff like that. Okay, and let's save that. Test 1, 2, 3. Save settings. Let's start the game. Here we are. Fight. So now we're playing with Achilles, attack level 1 etc. So when we hover over this card, we see a skill bonus +2 because we have here this attack level 1. We have a skill bonus. Let's activate the rage trait, and then we should see that here that base damage is 6, skill bonus is +2, which makes 8, and then let's do something. Come on. Rage trait has been activated, ×2 equals 16. So if now this is up, 16, bam, and he dies. So that's basically it. Let's go back here and see how that works. So we just have this variable base damage, we set this base damage, and then whenever skill value equals larger than 1, we use the skill value multiplier here to add that skill bonus. We see if it's targeted, a damage multiplier, the rage trait. And here, for example, that's the reason why we add a card or scroll UID here, because we then see if we're using a lightning and this artifact type is equals lightning, then lightning cards do extra damage. For example, that's why we add that there. And then it's just semicolon separated here, and that means that here in the enemy apply damage, what we do is we get that damage and we split it using token add. Token add, we just say split this using a semicolon and get the first parameter, which is the number. And if we go to the hint, for example, here you'll see that normally here the hint just does the same thing. Function for UMED, cost damage, this card type, the scroll we're passing, and we split this thing using a semicolon, and we get the second part, which is the string of the hint. That's actually basically how that thing works. So what else have I been up to here? We've also done some extra things like this one. So we've got enemy start fire and enemy extinguish fire. When we cast a fire spell to an enemy that starts the sandbox, then the enemy should be set on fire. And I believe I have this wet fire thingy here. And then we see the ignite and the broken jar. Ignite is like we set the enemy on fire, and broken jar makes an enemy wet, and they should cancel each other out. So let's start the game. So here we are.
Fight.
We can use the scroll. I've set the settings that we can use two scrolls in one game. We set it on fire, and that's enemy start fire function being called, and then we make him wet, and then the extinguish fire is out. So that's what that does. It's very simple. It just goes and creates this fire object somewhere, and then extinguish fire just picks that effect and then stops that thing. So let's start and extinguish fire. So what we did next is also I extended a lot of these JSON files. So a lot of these JSON files here used to only add cards and artifacts and scrolls here, but I've added an extra thing here. So the level up threshold starts. We start with a level up threshold of 1000. I can tweak that here. The multiplier. So whenever we go and exceed the threshold, then the next threshold will be 2.5 times the prior threshold. The hint fade time and the hint delay can also be set here. These four things used to be hard-coded inside code, but I've decided to put them in a JSON file because later on I plan to put those JSON files online somewhere, so I can tweak all of those settings without releasing an update of the game or something like that. Primarily in beta testing, but maybe also after go live. What we did next is in the AI, here, so you probably remember from former videos, there used to be a very large function here called create probability tables, where all of those loot types and enemy levels and loot artifacts and stuff like that were all here in here. So we've moved them, or I've moved them into a probability tables JSON here, and in this JSON file you can see that this attack probability table contains two values, attack and defend, with value 5 and 1, and all of these things are in here actually. Loot artifact 2, so these loots here, and all with an equal value. And all of those things can be configured here, and all of those things are just read using a single function called load probability table. We pass along the name of a probability table, which is in effect that name, which is configured here. This is the name of the probability table, and then here we just read that probability tables, and we loop through the items, and we add the probability tables to that probability table in the advanced random plugin. So that is for that. And the last thing I did is I tweaked a bit here this generate loop, because I wasn't really satisfied with the way it works. And right now we can spawn coins, artifacts, scrolls, crafting, spellbook, but I want to be able to spawn also cards in the future. So one day I'm going to change that up. But in order to do that, it was a little bit limited the way it worked. So what I'm doing now, basically, I'm creating that loot drop, and then I just loop through from one to var number of loot, and var number of loot, that itself is a probability table. So there's a probability table depending on the difficulty level here, and the difficulty level is, if you remember, it's easy, medium, or hard. And if it's easy, there's more loot to be dropped than in hard, for example. So using this difficulty level variable, we're selecting the correct probability table, and from that we just select a number of loot. It can be 1, 2, 3, 4. And here we loop through it, and then we check it. Okay, now we want some coins, or we want an artifact, or we want a scroll. Depending on what we see here in the loot type, which is yet another probability table, we're going to spawn coins, we're going to spawn an artifact, a scroll, crafting, or spellbook, and later on I'm just going to add cards here as well. So depending on the loot type, we're also using yet another probability table to spawn anything in that probability table. So that's it. I hope you liked it. As always, please like, please subscribe, and see you next time.